So the third thing we're going to chat about here is the habitat focus, or focusing on habitat. Habitat is, takes in a lot of different points, but the points that we're going to touch on today are the points that pertain to the ruts and why it connects there together. The focusing on habitat, one is your food plots, and in that food plots, I know we speak a lot about food plots and not taking anything from them public ground hunters. Obviously, we've touched on this before, but I am a public ground hunter too. So when I say food plots, I mean your destination feed location, your food plots of any sort, whether that's ag, whether that's out on public ground, them oak flats or secluded oak areas that we all love to find off the beaten path, that those deer feel secluded or secure using. Wherever that is, whatever that is what I refer to as your food plots. Having those food plots, or finding those destination feed areas that are strongest, planting them food plots early in the year. This is the time that it really focuses on. It really pays off to have those performing at their best, or find out on public ground what is performing at its highest. The reason is the power that it has going into this time of the year. It all focuses back to food for your buck mentality, food for your stand placements, and obviously food ties into the habitat itself, is because it's such a rebounding time period during the second rut, and they have to be able to conquer the second rut. They have to be able to maybe accomplish that, but you're going to see those mature bucks aren't necessarily always the ones that are getting the breeding done in the second rut. It's because they're tired. They're going back because they are the ones that lost the most mentality. Now you're going to see your 2 and your 3-year-old bucks kind of take over certain areas where maybe they are going to be doing the that breeding during the second rut. And a lot of it has to go with just herd mentality in general, because of the food source. Because your young does are a lot like we talked. Your young does are the ones coming into heat, and if you notice, like I said before, is your doe fawns, your button bucks are all the first ones usually out to the field, no matter what time of the year, but especially anything that's got to do with feeding. They're like kids. They run out there and early. They're out there early in your plots. And the reason, and what ties to that is the immature bucks, your 2 and 3-year-old deer, your yearlings, your 2-year-olds, and your 3-year-old deer are usually this time of the year are attached to those closer than your more mature bucks, because the more mature bucks aren't just gonna go back to they give up the entire herd drama, and they go back to just wanting to be next to everybody. The older they get, they never really resource back to that. So they're still away, and then that gives that window of a immature buck to slide in there, and he's closer to the action, if you will. He's out there with the does earlier, and if one of them comes into heat or is close to it, that's where you see a lot of sometimes maybe that mature buck isn't the one doing the breeding. But so your food plots have to be powerful. That has to be a piece of the puzzle. Your destination feed locations, no matter what you're at, has to be strong. So focus on that. And the most powerful thing here is to focus on is in your bedding areas, your bedding area browse. Now browse is a huge portion. So depending on where you're at in the country, here where we're at, it's upwards of 80 to 85% of a deer's intake is woody browse. So if you take woody browse completely out of their diet, you're going to be in the wrong location in a quick hurry. This time of the year, it's all about food. So if they don't have the strong food plots, they don't have them strong destination feed locations, or those are now gone, then they're going to resource back to browse. So when they feed 5 times in a 24-hour period, they have to have that. So what you're going to find is maybe the browse was strong in the early season, all the way up until the rut, and when the fall hit and everything started to die, that browse changed. That is something to focus on your habitat improvements. We'll talk about in a different video, but that's something to focus on. Is if your bedding areas are lacking browse, your does and your bucks are going to go find that bedding area where that browse is strong, and where that browse is strong, that's where they're going to be. So the idea is to have that browse ideal and able to sustain the conditions early of the year, and still be there and still give you that woody browse or that hardwood ruddy browse, if anything, later in the year, so you can take that second rut. And the reason is you want to be able to, during the second rut, you want to be able to focus the deer's attention back on point A and point B. A being bedding areas, B, or A and B, whichever way you want to look at it. A and B being food and bedding. You want to be able to emphasize that food in those areas just as strong as you can get it, and you can't get that accomplished unless your browse is overabundant. The more browse you have in a bedding area, the better. And that is where that comes in, because you want to focus that deer's attention. You want to hold them back in those areas, which opens that door for you to get back into those stand locations safely. The perfect idea is to have, like we've talked before, and that's why I always, I chat about having these transition areas full of browse, or as much browse as you can get in them through your transition areas, because you need that thick area during the rut, you need that thick area early season, you need that thick browse during the rut so they feed through that, and you need that thick browse in those bedding areas. And once you get that habitat correct, now you can see that all of the pieces of the puzzles tie together here as far as habitat, and that browse is a big factor here. If you're in a tree stand location in that transition area, and you're because of the time of the year, because it's kind of the winter months here, and your browse is not as strong as you thought maybe it was in those early season transition area stand locations like we talked about before, what I highly recommend is either moving that stand location towards the bedding area a little bit closer, not all the way into where your rut stands were, but closer, or finding a browse pocket somewhere that is in that transition area that has more browse. And the reason is what you'll see this time of the year, what you'll find when you're doing that postseason scouting, is those areas become their core areas that they will focus back to. And a lot of times they'll change the transition area going to that browse pockets, and it might be kind of a weave effect, where before early season it was because it's so thick and dense that they feel secure with leaf cover and everything, that it's a straight line between. I mean, you can, some of them trails are as straight as a gun barrel, is because you can look right down them for hundreds of yards, a lot of times. And you won't find that this time of the year. You'll find that weave effect, and the reason that is they're going from browse pocket to browse pocket. So if you're in, just to finish up on that, if you're in those areas, you're going to move that stand back into those transition areas. I recommend finding the trail. Talking about stand placement, I recommend finding that trail, focusing back on that because of the herd mentality that everything switches back to the food. And I also recommend making sure you are in a browse pocket that is kind of like your first rut tree stand, where you want to dive into those thick areas. You want to find a browse pocket. It has to be thicker, still has to be thick around that, because you're promoting that feeding, that the more that they can feed in their bed, and they can continue that feeding pattern all the way out into their destination feed locations, that's where you're going to be successful. Now, if that browse isn't correct in your area, and everything is open, if it's a heavy TSI and they just don't have that, the TSI was done wrongly, wrong time of the year, whatever the case is, then maybe you won't experience this if there's conifers, and that all ties into it as far as edge. But what we find is, and I find a lot of the time is that transition area will go from browse pocket to browse pocket on their way from bedding out to feeding. And that's something to look for when you are hanging that. Just don't go hang a stand in a wide open because there's a heavy beat trail. Put yourself closer to that, because those areas are going to be a stopping point for those to eat. So it becomes kind of a staging area, if you will, where they'll hold up. And if this time of the year, when the clock is ticking in the evening, when we're losing daylight fast, and it's getting dark now at like 5:30ish or something, you minutes are, they seem to tick away real quick, and you don't want a deer hanging up 50 yards from you, 100 yards from you in one of these browse pockets, eating and munching because they're trying to fulfill that browse requirement that they may have not reached. So find those browse pockets, guys. Hang those stands in there. Get those scrapes hung like we had talked before. and focus those attentions. You know, if you can leave those scrapes like we talked, focus that attention back on there, move that scrape, put it back in front of there in those browse pockets. Remember buck mentality, focus on your stand placements, and know the difference between the first and the second rut.